It was supposed to be a simple expedition for kindling, a brief respite to gather his thoughts among the whispering pines. But when Thomas Bennett stumbled upon what lay hidden beneath those ancient trees, his existence and the lives of two traumatized little girls who'd already endured unimaginable suffering would be forever transformed. This tale speaks of bravery without a claim, compassion without expectation, and devotion that asks for nothing yet gives everything. If narratives like these resonate within your soul, we welcome you to join our community. There's always space for another heart that believes in the transformative power of unexpected beginnings. Let me transport you to the moment when everything shifted. The setting sun bathed the forest in golden hues, filtering through the branches like luminous beams through cathedral windows. A cool wind danced through the towering pines, stirring leaves still clinging to branches despite autumn's advancing grip. Thomas adjusted his weathered canvas backpack straps and inhaled deeply. These woods had always been his sanctuary, a place of solitude, restoration, and remembrance. He moved deliberately, scanning the ground for suitable branches. The aging wood stove in his rustic home was particular, and his boy Michael always claimed the timber from the hillside smelled of fresh-baked breakfast when it burned. Thomas smiled at the thought. At just 10 years old, Michael still harbored innocent wonder. As he knelt beside a carpet of emerald moss, something captured his attention. Barely audible, yet unmistakably human. A whimper. Soft, broken, like someone who'd wept for so long they'd forgotten how to stop. He went completely still. Another sound followed, more desperate, more urgent. Thomas abandoned his armful of branches and moved silently toward the distressing noise, pulse hammering against his ribs. His footfalls were nearly imperceptible on the damp forest floor. His parental instincts took command, overriding those of a woodsman. The faint cries guided him down a narrow trail half concealed by undergrowth and shadows. He pushed through tangled branches, his shirt catching on thorns, until the path widened slightly. And then he saw them, two small girls bound to a tree trunk. Barely 7 years old, identical twins with long ebony hair, their pale faces streaked with grime and tears. Their wrists were secured with coarse rope, their dresses torn, feet bare and injured. One child huddled against the other, trying to protect her with what little strength remained. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. "Dear God," he whispered. The girls flinched at the sound, recoiling against the tree like frightened woodland creatures. "Easy, easy," he said softly, raising his hands. "You're safe now. I'm here to help. No one will hurt you." The slightly older twin blinked up at him. Her lips quivered, but no words came. The younger one simply continued weeping into her sister's shoulder. "I'm going to free you," Thomas said, crouching slowly. He retrieved his pocket knife, opening it with trembling fingers. "I swear no one will ever harm you again." He worked on the ropes methodically, every fiber of his being vibrating with urgency. His mind raced with questions. Who could commit such cruelty? Why abandon them so deep in these remote woods? But he pushed the thoughts aside. First priority, get the children to safety. The bindings finally snapped with a sharp sound, and the girls collapsed into his arms like exhausted fledglings. They remained silent, asking nothing about his identity, just clinging to him as if he represented the last warmth in a frozen world. "My name's Thomas," he murmured. "You don't need to speak yet, but I'm carrying you home. Soon you'll be warm. Soon you'll be protected." The older girl nodded almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Thomas removed his jacket and wrapped it around their tiny frames, then gathered them both into his arms. Their weight seemed nothing compared to the dread pressing against his chest like ice. The nearest roadway was a grueling 40-minute trek. He didn't hesitate. He walked. Every twig snapping underfoot echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. He kept his eyes fixed on the path, straining to detect any sign of pursuit. But the forest had gone eerily quiet. Too quiet. Halfway down the ridge, the younger girl whimpered in his embrace. Thomas glanced down. "Are you all right?" She gazed up with glassy, unfocused eyes. Her voice was scarcely a whisper. "Are Are you our guardian angel? His throat constricted. No, little one, he answered gently. Just a person? She nodded, her eyelids fluttering closed. You feel warm like an angel. Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat. By the time he reached the ranger station at the town's edge, the sun had disappeared beyond the horizon, painting the sky in deep violets and fading amber. Sheriff Dawson was already there, leaning against his patrol vehicle with a thermos in hand. When he spotted Thomas approaching, his expression darkened with concern. What in heaven's name? Dawson's voice dropped as he rushed forward. Are they? They're alive, Thomas replied, his voice hoarse. But they've endured something terrible. Paramedics quickly arrived, carefully transferring the girls onto stretchers. Thomas maintained his grip until the very last moment. As the ambulance departed, Dawson placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Where did you find them? North Ridge, Thomas answered, about a mile beyond the old logging boundary. Dawson exhaled slowly. That far out? What on earth were they doing in such a remote? He stopped mid-sentence. Wait, you said they? Thomas nodded. Twins. Identical. Maybe 7 years old. The sheriff straightened abruptly. His gaze darted to his radio. Good Lord, he muttered, then activated his microphone. Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We may have located the Wilson twins. Thomas blinked in confusion. Wilson? Dawson turned, his face ashen. Victoria Wilson. Haven't you seen the news coverage? Her daughters vanished 5 days ago from her estate in Mapleton. Half the state has been searching. Thomas nearly collapsed. He had just carried out of the wilderness the children of one of the wealthiest women in the country. But at this moment, that meant nothing. They were alive. That was all that mattered. Morning arrived gradually over Pine Haven, touching the rooftops of the peaceful town with tints of gold and soft peach. The aroma of fresh coffee drifted through screen doors, mingling with radio broadcasts and birdsong. What should have been an ordinary day felt markedly different throughout Pine Haven. Not after what Thomas Bennett had carried from those woods the previous evening. By mid-morning, rumors spread rapidly through diners and general stores, through hardware shops and barber shops. The whispers all shared the same message. Thomas Bennett found them, the Wilson girls in our forest. Heaven help him, he carried them all the way down. Some called him heroic. Others said he was fortunate to have survived. But everyone, regardless of how cynical or doubtful, agreed on a single truth. Something profound had occurred in Pine Haven, something extraordinary. Thomas sat alone at the small kitchen table in his modest home, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. The coffee inside had long since cooled, but he hadn't noticed. His right arm ached from carrying the girls. His legs felt heavy as stone, but the silence weighed on him most profoundly. The house seemed too empty without Michael. His son had spent the night at a friend's house. Thank goodness. Thomas couldn't bear the thought of Michael seeing the girls in that condition. Not yet. Not until they were recovered and smiling and whole again. A gentle knock at the door broke the silence. Thomas rose, muscles protesting, and opened it to find Sheriff Dawson on the porch. He looked like he hadn't slept, uniform wrinkled, expression drawn, but something else showed in his eyes too. Something resembling reverence. Morning, Dawson said, holding up a pastry box. Figured you hadn't eaten. Thomas stepped aside. You figured correctly. They sat at the kitchen table, the sheriff pushing the box of warm cinnamon rolls toward him. Thomas took one absently, breaking off a corner. His hunger hadn't yet caught up with his body's needs. I spoke with Mapleton police last night, Dawson said. The girls are stable. No signs of severe physical trauma, though they were dehydrated. Doctors said they were malnourished, tied to that tree for more than 24 hours, possibly longer. Thomas closed his eyes. The image of their delicate wrists bound with coarse rope made his chest tighten again. You saved their lives, Thomas. He didn't respond. I mean it, Dawson added. A team of FBI agents is flying in this afternoon. You'll be featured on every news channel by nightfall. I didn't do it for publicity, Thomas said quietly. I know. That's precisely why it matters. They sat in silence a moment longer. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves with gentle reverence. There's more, Dawson said finally. Their mother. She's coming here. Thomas blinked in surprise. To Pine Haven? Yes. Victoria Wilson herself should arrive by noon. Thomas leaned back, stunned. He recognized the name, of course. Everyone did. Victoria Wilson, the enigmatic technology billionaire who had withdrawn from public view following her husband's unexpected death 2 years earlier. There were speculations, depression, legal battles, bodyguards, a fortress-like mansion in Mapleton. Some labeled her reclusive. Others claimed she was broken. And now she was traveling to his town to meet the man who discovered her children bound to a tree. By noon, a subtle tension had descended upon Pine Haven. A pair of unmarked black SUVs entered the town, sleek and foreign against the weathered streets and faded paint of old storefronts. Locals peered through blinds and curtains, curiosity practically vibrating through the atmosphere. Thomas stood beside Sheriff Dawson outside the small medical clinic, wearing a clean shirt and jeans that couldn't conceal the exhaustion in his bearing. He hadn't shaved or slept, but it hardly mattered to him. The vehicle doors opened, and she emerged. Victoria Wilson wasn't what Thomas anticipated. She wasn't cold or commanding. She didn't display diamonds or project power. Instead, she appeared exhausted. Her tailored coat hung loosely from her slender frame. Her hair, once featured on magazine covers, was pulled back in a simple twist. But her eyes, those eyes contained a tempest of anguish and rage and fragile optimism all at once. She walked past the sheriff without acknowledgement. Her heels clicked softly on the stone walkway as she approached Thomas. She halted a few feet away, studying him with a guarded expression. "You're the man who found them." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." A silence stretched between them, dense and taut. She examined him as if attempting to read beneath the surface of his features. How did you even know they were there?" "I didn't," Thomas replied. "I was gathering firewood. I heard crying. Most people would have ignored it or called someone else." He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not most people." Her eyes flickered, something resembling gratitude but distant. She nodded once. "I'd like to thank you properly. When this ordeal concludes—" "No thanks necessary," he said gently. "Just relieved they're safe." She looked downward, then away as if afraid she might crumble. Then she whispered, "They asked for you." Thomas blinked in surprise. "What?" "Lily and Emma. They asked if the man who carried them would return." He struggled for words. The truth settled heavily in his chest. Those children had clung to him as if he represented their last sanctuary in the world. And in that moment, he had been exactly that. "I'll come," he said finally. When he entered the clinic, the twins brightened like sunrise, their bruised faces illuminated with recognition. Emma sat up in bed, arms extended. Lily smiled through her bandages. Thomas knelt beside them, fighting back tears. And behind him, Victoria Wilson observed, an unfamiliar emotion creeping into her guarded expression. Not fear, not suspicion, but something far more dangerous. Hope. The following morning arrived shrouded in low-hanging mist, softening Pine Haven's harsh edges. The town moved more slowly than usual, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Inside the modest guest cottage behind the clinic, Victoria Wilson stood at the window, a mug of untouched tea cooling in her hands. Her gaze followed the sway of distant pines, but her thoughts wandered elsewhere. Her daughters were alive. That singular truth had landed like a stone in her chest, heavy, real, impossible. She had envisioned every terrible ending. None included a weathered carpenter from a town with one traffic light and a general store that closed before sunset. Yet it had been him. She turned from the window and walked quietly into the small bedroom where Lily and Emma slept in matching hospital gowns. They were recovering well physically. Emotionally, she couldn't be certain. Lily refused to relinquish the carved wooden bird Thomas had given her. Emma had only fallen asleep after whispering, "He'll come back, won't he?" Victoria didn't know how to respond. Later that morning, she entered the front room where Sheriff Dawson and Patrick Reed, her longtime legal advisor, waited. Patrick stood when she appeared, impeccable in his charcoal suit, even in this remote setting. "We're arranging secure transportation back to Mapleton," he stated efficiently. The media is gathering like vultures. You'll be safer at the estate. Victoria didn't immediately respond. Instead, she asked, "Have you spoken with Thomas Bennett?" Dawson leaned forward, surprised. "Not since yesterday." "Why?" "I want a private conversation with him." Patrick hesitated. "Victoria, I understand your gratitude." "This isn't about gratitude," she said softly. "This is about truth." Thomas arrived just after 11, wearing the same leather boots and faded flannel shirt he'd worn countless times before. His shoulders remained square, but his eyes reflected caution. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being underestimated and long resigned to that reality. Victoria met him at the cottage's rear porch. The sunlight was beginning to dissolve the morning mist, casting golden light across the wild grass. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I promised the girls I would—" "I didn't mean them." A pause. He nodded slowly. "All right." They sat on the bench beside the herb garden, basil and thyme growing untamed, their fragrance rising like memories. "I know men like you don't seek recognition," Victoria began, "but I need to understand why you did what you did, why you carried two strangers through miles of wilderness and darkness, endangering yourself." Thomas's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. "I wasn't thinking about their identity," he said finally. "I was thinking about what kind of man I'd become if I didn't act." Victoria studied him, uncertain how to process an answer so straightforward and unrefined. Most people would have contacted authorities, remained uninvolved. "I've discovered that waiting for others to take action doesn't always yield positive results." Her expression softened slightly. "You've experienced loss. My wife, 6 years ago, car accident. I'm sorry. She was courageous, the quiet kind of brave that simply perseveres daily." Victoria looked away, her throat constricting. "I lost my husband too," she said after a moment. 2 years ago. Heart attack in his sleep." She hadn't voiced those words aloud in a long time. Thomas didn't offer pity, just respectful silence, which somehow felt more appropriate. Inside the house, Lily tiptoed to the window and peered through lace curtains. She observed her mother and Thomas conversing. He smiled at something, and her mother, not quite smiling, tilted her head just enough that Lily detected the shadow of a grin. "Emma," she whispered. "They're outside. They're talking." Her sister sat up in bed. "Are they arguing?" "No, I think they're being friendly." Emma smiled drowsily. "I knew he'd return." Back on the porch, Victoria crossed her arms. "When I first saw you, I thought you were provincial," she admitted, a hint of a smile. "Dangerous." Thomas chuckled, a warm sound that surprised even him. "You're not the first to think so. Why didn't you ask who they were? Where they came from?" "Didn't matter. They were just frightened little girls tied to a tree." She looked down. "I'm unaccustomed to people acting without ulterior motives." "Well," he said, "perhaps this town maintains old-fashioned values." Victoria exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. "I don't know how to properly thank you." "You already have. With trust." He stood to leave, brushing off his jeans. As he turned to depart, Victoria called out almost instinctively, "Thomas," he paused, "would you join us for dinner with the girls?" Thomas turned to face her, eyebrows raised. "You needn't feel obligated," she added quickly. "I just believe they'd appreciate it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'd appreciate that too." That evening, as stars emerged like scattered diamonds over the town, Thomas sat at an unfamiliar dinner table, between two chattering little girls who couldn't stop talking, and a woman who hadn't truly smiled in years, but now appeared to remember how. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like a temporary visitor in someone else's story. He felt like he belonged, even if only for one evening. The aroma of freshly baked cornbread permeated Thomas's modest cabin, blending with pine and sawdust. The essence of home, authentic and lived in. Michael, barefoot and flour-dusted, peered into the oven with exaggerated concentration. "Don't open it yet," Thomas cautioned, placing a wooden spoon across a simmering pot of stew. "It needs more time." Michael sighed dramatically and flopped onto a kitchen stool. "How much more time?" "Enough to build character." "That's what you said about chopping wood yesterday." "And I was right then, too." Michael grinned. Thomas ruffled his son's hair with a hand calloused from years of manual labor, yet gentle with a tenderness impossible to fabricate. Outside, the forest murmured with evening breezes and lengthening shadows. Inside, their world seemed untouched by sorrow or wealth or headlines, until a polished black SUV rumbled up the gravel driveway. Michael rushed to the window. "Is that them?" Thomas wiped his hands on a towel, his heartbeat unexpectedly quickening. "Appears so." Moments later, Victoria Wilson emerged, followed by Lily and Emma, each carrying small paper bags and beaming with uninhibited joy. Victoria lingered at the porch's edge, eyes surveying the property as if exploring unfamiliar territory, which in many ways it was. "Please come in," Thomas said, opening the door wide. Lily and Emma darted inside, squealing delightedly as Michael greeted them, like longtime friends. Victoria entered more hesitantly, her gaze absorbing every detail. The space was unpretentious. Wood-paneled walls, mismatched furniture, a stone fireplace with a visible crack. She might have found charming if she hadn't spent the past decade surrounded by glass and marble sanctuaries. But something else struck her. The scent. Home, worn leather, homemade soup, the subtle sweetness of cinnamon. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "You have a lovely home," she said, meaning it sincerely. "It's modest," Thomas replied, closing the door, "but sufficient." Dinner unfolded in joyful chaos. The children passed cornbread reverently, giggled over steaming stew, and invented creative names for the family dog. An aging mutt called Rusty, who accepted attention with dignified patience. Thomas observed them with quiet wonder. Victoria surprised herself by laughing genuinely. Not a polite chuckle, but an authentic burst of merriment when Michael spilled stew and solemnly declared it a strategic gravy maneuver. She hadn't laughed like that since before James died, and she couldn't recall when someone last looked at her without expectations. After dinner, Thomas offered to show his workshop behind the house. The evening light slanted through tall windows, transforming sawdust particles into suspended gold. Victoria entered, running her fingertips along an unfinished rocking chair. "Did you create all this?" "Most of it," he confirmed, lifting a piece of oak from a nearby shelf. "This one's for Mrs. Thornton down the road. She lost her husband last spring. Says the silence is overwhelming at night." "You made her a chair?" "Figured if she's sitting alone with her thoughts, it should be in something beautiful." Victoria's hand paused on the wood. Thomas glanced at her, curious. "Everything all right?" She turned, slightly embarrassed. "It's just, I've spent so long in environments where nothing was built to endure, only to impress." He offered a half smile. "Well, this community operates differently. We still value craftsmanship and Sunday desserts." She laughed softly. "You make it sound idyllic." "No," he said quietly, "just authentic." They returned to find the children curled beneath a blanket, watching an old Western film on the small television. Lily rested her head against Michael's shoulder. Emma clutched the wooden bird Thomas had carved. Victoria's heart constricted. She'd invested millions in protection, constructed barriers, hired guards, retreated from society. Yet none provided the security these children felt on this worn couch through a carpenter's simple kindness. Thomas handed her a cup of tea. Chamomile, unasked for, yet somehow perfect. "Do you still grieve for her?" she asked, avoiding his gaze. He understood immediately whom she meant. "Every day," he admitted, "but I don't mourn her absence anymore. I honor her memory through raising Michael, through trying to help others." Victoria blinked. "That sounds overwhelming." "It isn't," he said, sipping his tea. "It's challenging, certainly, but the meaningful kind, the kind that creates something worthwhile." Later, as Victoria helped the girls into the SUV, Emma leaned through the window and whispered, "Don't forget about us." "Never," Thomas promised, playfully tapping the vehicle's side. "Next time I'm baking blackberry cobbler." Victoria smiled genuinely, an expression still unfamiliar on her face. As they departed, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Thomas remained at the edge of the driveway, silhouetted against the porch light, hand raised in farewell. He didn't wave like someone desperate to maintain connection. He waved like someone who had already given something precious freely. That night, as she tucked her daughters into bed at the cottage, Lily asked drowsily, "Can we stay here instead?" Victoria smoothed her daughter's hair and whispered, "Perhaps for a little while." But within her heart, something else awakened, a yearning not merely for security, but for belonging. The sun rose behind heavy clouds the following morning, as if the sky itself bore the weight of unspoken truths. Victoria stood in the clinic's makeshift kitchen corner, absently stirring her coffee. Her daughters remained asleep, intertwined like vines in the twin bed. It marked the first night they hadn't awakened crying. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt watched. Her phone vibrated on the counter. A message, one word, urgent. It came from Patrick. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, boots crunching on gravel as she crossed toward the rented SUV. Patrick already waited behind the wheel, appearance immaculate despite the early hour. Wordlessly, he handed her a manila folder. Victoria opened it. Inside were copies of internal communications, financial records, a confidential report from Mapleton Police. "What is this?" she whispered. Patrick avoided her gaze. The man who coordinated the girl's security detail, Richard Fleming, transferred a substantial sum into an offshore account 48 hours before the kidnapping. Her mouth went dry. "Richard? He's been with us since James's death." "I know." Victoria's thoughts spun chaotically. Fleming had been her husband's closest confidant, a trusted friend, or so she believed. After James died, Fleming had managed everything: security, media, even her children's educational arrangements. She had entrusted him with her entire life, and he had betrayed her children. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated betrayal. Her grip on the folder tightened. "Does Thomas know any of this?" "No, and he doesn't require that information." Patrick's tone was protective, but carried an edge she hadn't noticed before. Victoria regarded him sharply. "He rescued them. I realize that, but you needn't share your personal history. Exercise caution, Victoria. He appears genuine, but you've been deceived before. You're vulnerable now." Victoria remained silent, but something within her bristled defensively. That afternoon, she discovered Thomas behind the general store loading bundles of split cedar into his truck bed. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms dusted with sawdust. His shirt was worn, and a smudge of dirt marked his temple. He looked nothing like anyone from her world, and precisely that quality drew her toward him. "Building Noah's Ark?" she asked lightly. He looked up, surprised. "Possibly. This valley floods every few years." She smiled, then hesitated. "Do you have a moment?" He wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded, gesturing toward a nearby bench. They sat. "I spoke with Patrick this morning," she began. Thomas nodded. "Everything all right?" "No," she admitted, "but it will improve." A pause followed. She wanted to reveal everything: the files, the betrayal, the horrifying realization that someone within her inner circle had orchestrated this nightmare. But she couldn't. Not yet. "I simply wanted to express my gratitude again, not just for rescuing them, but for what followed." Thomas looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" They smile now. They sleep peacefully. That didn't happen before. He lowered his gaze, humble discomfort evident in his posture. Perhaps they just needed reassurance they weren't alone. "So did I," she said, almost inaudibly. Thomas's breath caught momentarily. Then she changed topics. "Could I visit your workshop again? I'd like to commission something. A table, perhaps for the girls." "No," she corrected herself, voice steady. "For me." The workshop felt warmer than she remembered. It smelled of cedar and oil and something faintly sweet, like distant memories. Thomas removed a cloth covering from a nearly completed headboard, hand-carved with intricate ivy patterns. "It's exquisite," Victoria remarked. "I started this after my wife passed. Never completed it." "Why not?" "Wasn't certain I'd ever rebuild a home." She turned toward him, and now he regarded her with a gentle seriousness. Now I'm beginning to think I never stopped trying. Back at the clinic, danger approached undetected. A man in a dark sedan parked 2 blocks away, monitoring the entrance through binoculars. His phone rang once. He answered silently. A clipped voice instructed, "She's growing comfortable. Remind her what she stands to lose." He nodded. That evening, as twilight painted the windows deep purple, Victoria returned to the clinic carrying a small paper bag. Inside was a carved wooden bird, identical to Emma's. She placed it on the windowsill above her daughter's bed. She failed to notice the shadow across the street, didn't detect the faint smoke rising from the corner trash receptacle, didn't hear the soft click of a camera lens capturing her silhouette against the golden light. The next morning, Patrick burst through the clinic doors clutching his phone. "Victoria, security's been compromised." She stared at him. "What kind of compromise?" "Images of you, the girls, Thomas circulating on encrypted channels." Her blood turned to ice. "What type of images?" "Telephoto lens, surveillance. Someone's been watching." She felt the floor shift beneath her. The threat hadn't disappeared. It had merely retreated temporarily, and now it circled again. The wind shifted that night, not in temperature or intensity, but in essence. The trees outside swayed uneasily, and the insects fell silent long before midnight. Thomas couldn't sleep. Something clawed at his consciousness, an uneasiness he hadn't experienced since losing his wife. He stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, watching shadows stretch across his yard. The moon hung high but obscured by clouds. He listened, not for sounds but for unusual silence, the kind that precedes disaster. A distant rumble, then far across the darkness, a flash of orange. His breath caught. The cottage, the clinic's guest house where Victoria and the girls were staying, engulfed in flames. Thomas leapt from the porch before fully processing the situation. His truck keys remained on the counter. He didn't stop for them. He ran, boots pounding earth, lungs burning, legs cutting through darkness. He heard the first scream when still 100 yards away. Emma, then Lily, then silence. Flames devoured the windows like ravenous beasts, consuming the roof with hungry intensity. Smoke billowed from the eaves. A small crowd had begun gathering, voices rising in panic, but no one approached. Not until Thomas charged forward. He didn't hesitate. He removed his flannel shirt, wrapped it around his face, and plunged through the front door. Heat slammed against him like a physical barrier. The air became thick and suffocating. He dropped low, crawling beneath the smoke. "Lily! Emma!" he shouted. A small voice responded, "Here! Help us!" The girls were huddled behind an overturned dresser in the bedroom's far corner, coughing, faces streaked with soot. He gathered both into his arms. "Close your eyes," he instructed gently. "We're going home." The door frame collapsed behind them as he burst outside, flames pursuing his heels. He stumbled onto the grass, dropping to his knees with the girls in his lap, shielding them with his body until someone pulled them all further from the inferno. The girls coughed violently, but they were safe, alive. Thomas wasn't as fortunate. His left arm, exposed while protecting them, was severely burned. Angry blisters covered from wrist to shoulder. His breathing grew labored, his eyes unfocused. Someone called an ambulance, but Thomas barely registered the sound. Victoria arrived 5 minutes later, barefoot, breathless, heart thundering. She dropped beside the girls, tears streaming down her face as she examined their faces, hands, hair. Then she turned to Thomas. He lay on a stretcher now, eyes fluttering. She knelt beside him, fingers trembling. "You ran inside," she whispered, without hesitation. "They were crying," he replied, his voice barely audible. "I couldn't ignore them." "You could have died," he smiled weakly. "Better me than them." Tears coursed down her cheeks. "Don't say that." But he had already lost consciousness. The hospital in the neighboring county admitted him immediately. Burn unit, oxygen, pain management. The doctor explained he was fortunate. He would likely maintain full functionality, though scarring would remain. Victoria remained at his bedside, not from obligation, but from something deeper, more authentic. She wiped perspiration from his brow, adjusted his covers, whispered reassurances when pain overwhelmed him. "You're not alone. You're not alone." The girls brought handmade cards decorated with hearts and stick figures with oversized arms and bandaged hands. Michael visited too, embracing his father tightly before presenting a small wooden bird he'd attempted to carve himself. Thomas laughed, then winced from the movement. 3 days later, as the fire marshal's report arrived, Sheriff Dawson sat across from Victoria in the hospital cafeteria. "It was deliberate," he stated bluntly. Victoria nodded, lips compressed. "Accelerant near the bedroom window. Entry through the rear door. Professional, methodical." She didn't appear surprised. Dawson sighed. "You suspect Fleming?" She stared into her coffee. "I suspect whoever wants me destroyed. Killing my daughters would have accomplished that. Failing to kill them has only strengthened my resolve." He leaned forward. "Will you tell Thomas?" "Not yet," she said softly. "He's sacrificed enough. Now it's my responsibility." That night she entered his room carrying a small book. She sat beside his bed. He glanced over, blinking through medication-induced haziness. "What's that?" he asked. "My journal," she answered. "I stopped writing after James died, but yesterday I needed to." "Good," he murmured. "That's progress. I wrote about you." Thomas's lips curved slightly. "Hope you omitted the part where I fainted in front of everyone." She laughed quietly, brushing a curl from his forehead. "I wrote," she whispered, "that I doubted I could ever trust again until someone rushed into flames for my children without protection, without ulterior motives, and without hesitation." Thomas turned toward her fully now, eyes clear despite his pain. "You can," he assured her. "You can trust again." She offered no verbal response. She simply reached down and carefully took his hand, mindful not to cause discomfort, but he didn't recoil. Outside the hospital, the air carried the scent of approaching rain. Thunder rumbled distantly, but inside something fundamental had transformed. Something deeper than gratitude, something more ancient than grief, the initial sparks of renewal. Raindrops traced delicate patterns across the hospital windows as Victoria stood beside Thomas's bed, watching storm clouds roll like distant waves. The tempest outside mirrored her internal turmoil, a quiet unraveling, a gradual healing. He slept peacefully. His chest rose and fell beneath thin hospital sheets, arm bandaged and elevated. His beard had grown slightly, and tranquility softened his features, as if sleep granted temporary reprieve from carrying the world's burdens. On the bedside table sat a weathered leather journal, edges worn smooth. She hadn't noticed it previously. Curious, she opened it carefully, pages thick with ink accumulated over years. Inside were letters, all addressed to the same woman, Sarah. Each entry was dated, beginning 6 years earlier. The first entries revealed raw anguish, grief saturating every word. The subsequent ones quieter, and then gradually something remarkable emerged. Pain.